What's up, everybody? I'm Jason Hooper from FixYourGut.com. It is freezing cold in Texas, and we have been having issues keeping our power on. So I'm going to try to get a video recorded for this week, and I'm just going to do a reaction video from a link that one of our viewers sent us. Are you bloated or fat? How to tell the difference. And this comes from the channel of Thomas DeLauer, who's sort of in the field of sports science, and is sponsored by ButcherBox apparently. So yeah, check out his channel for more great content. Here we go.
Are you bloated or are you fat? Honestly, it's a serious question. It's a big concern, and it's something that I've even faced too. I look in the mirror and I'm wondering, okay, I feel distended, but is this visceral fat that I just can't see? Or is it just bloat? Because we do know that people can be fat without being like sloppy and mushy, right? So it's a constant concern. So I want to help you identify and understand what bloating is and what fat gain really is.
So basically what we're talking about in this video, I think, is going to be abdominal distension. Why do some people have distended lower abdomens? And is it all just because of the places that they gain fat? Is it genetics? Is it something else? I would suggest that the bloating and the fat are just two issues that you could have if you're having abdominal distension. A lot of it could just be caused by the muscles like the abductors, the pelvic floor muscles, all these things that might not be strong enough to keep everything in. So your man gut's just kind of spilling over your belt line because your core is pretty weak and you don't know how to tighten and firm your core. Some of it could be caused by just tight hip flexors. A lot of people sit too much. The hip flexors shorten over time, and then what happens is their pelvic interior tilt increases, and once it goes above about 15 degrees, you're going to start to see abdominal distension for sure. So a great way to fix abdominal distension for a lot of people is just fix your posture and firm up your core. Hernias, there's other reasons why you could have lower abdominal distension other than just fat gain or bloating. But let's see what he has to say.
So we're going to break down the two. You're tuned into the internet's leading performance, nutrition, and fat loss channel. New videos every single Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday, and a bunch of other videos.
He's doing Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday. That's a busy schedule. Kind of makes us over here look like slackers. We gotta put out some more content. I also really like his studio setup, with sort of the ivy growing on this sort of like rustic farmer's market type of deal. I like the white door frames and the curtains and all that. Yeah. Family photo in the back. Really nice.
Videos throughout the week as well. I want to make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on that bell button to turn on notifications. And down in the description, you can check out something known as ButcherBox. So if you guys are interested in getting grass-fed, really think that they're bloated because they have a lot of gas in their body. That's really not necessarily the case. Okay, so here's what it looks like. When we're in a fasted state, we usually have about 100 milliliters of gas floating around throughout the course of our digestive system, our stomach.
Well, that's highly variable, and the standard deviation for that is enormous, and it differs not only by individual, but it differs per individual, day to day, hour per hour. So yeah, yeah.
Our small intestine, our colon, our transcending colon, descending colon, you name it. It's spread out fairly evenly. Then after we eat food, we have about a 65% increase in that gas. Now, that's fairly standard amongst healthy individuals. That's what's interesting. Most people end up producing a...
Yeah, it can be, that also is going to vary widely. People who have SIBO are going to have a lot more than that. People with upper gut infections are going to have a lot more than that. So yeah, it depends on what you eat as well. If you eat a lot of things that are easily fermentable, the bacteria are going to multiply and they're going to excrete gas, carbon dioxide. Some of them are going to excrete hydrogen. Some are going to excrete methane, some hydrogen sulfide, which is really bad. So yeah, it can vary quite a bit. The average doesn't necessarily mean anything if the standard deviation, is so wide.
About the same amount of gas as a result of a meal. But when you start looking at the studies, we find that bloating isn't necessarily because of too much gas. It's more about where that gas is. That's what's really intriguing. So when you actually looked at these studies, you found that most people that had more gas didn't necessarily have more bloating. There wasn't a direct correlation, and studies are showing this. Now, of course, with people that actually have some illnesses.
Well, I'd like to read the studies because, again, it's like, how are they measuring the gas? Are they measuring? Because he describes it in milliliters, which is a measurement of volume, and so basically how much your gastrointestinal tract is being inflated by the gas. How are they measuring that? And how are they determining where the gas is within that whole system? Those would be important questions to verify that hypothesis.
Like irritable bowel syndrome and Crohn's and things like that, yeah, sure, you might see more in the way of overall gas volume, but it's usually about where it ends up. So what that means is you could be bloated in one area of your intestinal tract, and it's causing a lot more distension and actual bloating than you might think. So it's really wild. Now, let's go ahead and look at what's really causing this excess bloat to begin with. You see, a lot of times people think it's because they're having protein. They'll be like, oh, I eat protein and I get bloated. I always feel kind of fat when I eat.
Yeah, a lot of athletes that consume a high protein diet do get bloated from protein, especially drinking protein shakes. And the issue there isn't necessarily with carbohydrate fermentation, but it's with being able to handle ammonia. And that ammonia can cause water retention. It can cause water to accumulate in the intestines, and that can absolutely cause bloating.
Eat protein. The reality is it's probably not the case. About 8 or 9 times out of 10, it's carbohydrate malabsorption. Because what happens is when we consume carbohydrates, we have to break down what are called disaccharides into monosaccharides.
All right, so he's talking about disaccharides, which are basically 2 monosaccharides that are joined together. And disaccharides are the D in FODMAP, and monosaccharide is the M. So yeah, eating high FODMAP foods will undoubtedly produce more gas because that's what bacteria eat.
Basically, bound sugars into individual sugars, to make it simple. Now what happens is if for some reason we lack the ability to break down these specific disaccharides.
See, that's the question. Why would we break down the ability? And in the case of IBS and people who don't make enough lactase enzyme, the dairy products will create a lot of gas because the bacteria will eat the lactose that we don't digest. And so it's basically like who's getting the nutrients first? Are we getting it, or are the bacteria getting it? And if the wrong bacteria get fed enough, they can overgrow and cause imbalances, and that can be a bad deal in the gut.
They end up floating down into the colon in their already still intact form, which means.
Yeah, so disaccharides in the colon, not a whole terrible amount of that occurring. Most of the time, people who have issues with monosaccharides and disaccharides are people with upper gut infections, like H. pylori, for instance, which do very well on monosaccharides, do really well on disaccharides. Once you get down into the colon, you're dealing with different sorts of issues, and the colon deals with gas very well and deals with bacteria for the most part very well too. It just depends on what's in the colon, not necessarily how much bacteria is in the colon, unlike unlike the small intestines, where you want that to be as sterile as possible.
Means they get acted upon by additional bacteria in the colon in the wrong place, and that causes excess hydrogen, methane, causes excess bloating.
No, that's not really the case. So in the colon, what you need to watch out for is Clostridium difficile, like C. diff for short. You want to watch out for Salmonella, Campylobacter, Shigella, that Klebsiella. Like it's these invasive bacteria that get in there and overgrow. Even E. coli can mess you up. But for the microflora in the colon, you just want it to be balanced. You don't have as much issue with overgrowth of total bacterial overgrowth in the colon as you do in the small intestine, even in the upper gut. So for that, you just have to sort of maintain that environment by eating a variety of foods and make sure that you don't give one bacteria an advantage over a different species because of what you're eating, because then they'll overpopulate and that can cause problems.
So basically, it's not breaking down and triggering the gas where it should trigger the gas. It's breaking down in the wrong area. And sure, that can make you uncomfortable and literally have gas, but more so, for the sake of this video, it's going to make you more bloated, and that's going to cause a big problem. So when you get to the end of the day and you're trying to figure out, did I get fat over the course of the day, or am I just bloated? Usually you have to look in reverse and figure out what you ate throughout the course of the day. Now, one of the things we specifically have to look at, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because some of it's debunked, is the world of FODMAP. Now, FODMAP stands for...
Yeah, I don't think that FODMAP's been debunked. It's just an acronym for different sorts of fermentable substrates. FODMAPs are definitely... I don't see how you could debunk a fermentable substrate. You might question the validity of putting somebody on a low FODMAP diet, but FODMAPs themselves are... it's just a definition for, or I guess definitions or categorizations for a lot of different fermentable substrates, different carbohydrates and proteins.
Fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Basically, it means they're foods that ferment a lot easier. They're foods that end up, generally speaking, winding up in the colon before they ferment, and they ferment.
Yeah, it's not really the issue, again, with FODMAPs of for most things with FODMAPs reaching the colon. Most of it's in the small intestine, and for like the polyols and stuff. For the monosaccharides, disaccharides, it's upper gut. For the fermentable resistant starches in the colon, again, you're not going to have issues with those unless you have something like Klebsiella, and you eat a lot of potatoes or you eat reheated rice or something like that.
A lot. And it means that it doesn't necessarily lead to a lot of gas, but at least the proliferation of more bacteria that lead to gas.
Yeah, that's right. You feed the bacteria, there's more bacteria, but the thing is, when the bacteria eat more, they're going to excrete more waste too, and the gases they produce are a product of that.
See, again, it's an indirect thing. So it's not always as simple. It's not like we just swallow a bunch of air and we're distended. It's more about what is the bacteria.
So air swallowing is a thing. A lot of people swallow air. It's interesting because if you have an upper gut issue, like let's say you have H. pylori overgrowth, H. pylori excretes an endotoxin that has an effect on your vagus nerve. And one of the side effects of that is that it causes you to swallow more air. So air swallowing is something that a lot of people do, and it can, of course, increase the gastric pressure inside the stomach.
Actually producing. So now let's talk about fat accumulation for a second. We don't accumulate fat as fast as you think. Okay, it's an energy balance, of course, but the reality is we don't just get fat over the course of the day. So if you wake up in the morning and your stomach is nice and tight and you feel lean, well, if you go through the end of the day and then suddenly you feel distended and bloated and kind of fat, I can almost promise you didn't gain that fat. Remember, you have to have an overage of 3,500 calories to essentially gain a pound of fat. Okay, so you have to have
He's absolutely right here. A lot of people that say, "Oh, I gained 20 pounds over the holidays." It's like, no, you didn't. Like, how you would have had? Do you know what you would have had to have eaten in order to make that happen? I wrote a blog on this. I think back in 2016 about debunking rapid weight gain. Most of it's going to be water retention, and some of it's probably going to be, just sitting around during the holidays and not being quite as active and having an effect on your hormone levels. Some people get stressed out over the holidays and they get more cortisol. So yeah, your hormones are going to play a big part in your water retention, and retaining too much water, especially around, the GI, could cause that abdominal distension for sure. I also want to point out, though, that weight loss is a similar mechanism too. So if you wake up looking shredded, it's not because you lost a bunch of weight in your sleep, because again, you would have had to have burned roughly 3,500 calories, and really it's not, that number is not exact, but my point is, that is probably more likely due to water shedding instead of water retention.
Have a lot of calories there. So some of the things that you do have to pay attention to, though, is that when our insulin levels are higher, it ends up making it so that we have more lipase and we have the ability to break down more fats and ultimately store them. So I don't want you to get confused and think that like fats are automatically burned for fuel, because fats can absorb into a cell pretty easily. So what ends up happening?
All right. So the mechanism for lipase is to hydrolyze fats, or basically break down longer chain fatty acids into shorter fatty acids, so that they can, be digested easier, sent to the liver, and converted into the triglycerides that we can use for fuel or store. So lipase does not necessarily mean you're going to gain weight just because you have more lipase. For instance, if you take an enzymatic digestive supplement that has lipase in it, it's not going to make you gain weight.
Happening is fats take about 10 times less energy to be stored than carbohydrates do. Now, this is coming from a guy that talks about keto a lot and the benefits.
Yeah, he's right. There's a biosynthetic pathway that has to get from a carbohydrate into a glycerin form that will eventually become a fat. So, but just because it takes 10 times more energy doesn't mean that it won't happen just as easily. It depends on the total amount of Gibbs free energy that's in the system to begin with. So if you're consuming a surplus of any macronutrient, you're going to be likely to accumulate fat, whether it's too much carbohydrate, too much protein, it's too much fat. It's going to have all the same effect anyway.
It's of keto, but I have to put that out there that if you are consuming a lot of fats and you're not in keto, well, those fats do get stored in a fat cell a lot easier than carbohydrates do.
Even if you're in ketosis, and you eat a surplus amount of fat, it's going to be stored as well. So that doesn't really have any impact. It's just excess calories. So excess calories get stored. That's the way we evolved, because we had to deal with famine.
So if you are eating a lot of fat and you're not in keto, you can actually gain fat over the course of the day, which leads me into, well, what are you looking for? What's the difference? Okay, so here's some interesting stuff. If you actually pinch your belly and actually pinch your fat, you can feel if a fat cell is engorged or not engorged, or you can feel if it's water. Like, seriously. So when you look at fat cells or you feel them, like, you quite literally can feel, for lack of a better term, little seeds. Okay.
Okay. So fat cells average about 0.1 millimeters. So they're very, very small, first of all. Secondly, they have a lipid membrane, which is very soft. So they're not hard like seeds. They're like soft little dropule type of things. And he's basically saying that you're going to feel through the skin and be able to detect these fat cells because of their texture. So I don't think that's a very good diagnostic.
Fat has little seeds. So when you pinch your skin and you feel it, you can feel little like nodules. And those are fat cells. And what's really interesting is at the beginning of the day, if you pinch your skin and you actually feel that, you can sometimes feel a little fat cell. Like you don't feel literally the cell, but you feel the little storage forms. Now, through the end of the day, as the day goes on and you pinch.
All right, so I don't know. When I was a kid and I was in school, we made these little stress balls out of like balloons, and we put like flour in them or whatever, or sand. And so, the individual pieces of flour, the individual grains of sand or something, which sand's a lot bigger than what a fat cell could grow to be. Can you feel through the latex of the balloon and detect the individual quote unquote seeds or nodules that he's talking about? I just don't see that happening. The other issue that I have with this is he's talking about abdominal distension, which is and he was hypothesizing that can be caused by visceral fat or bloating, which is the title of the video, Are You Bloated or Fat, causing the lower abdominal distension. And so what he's talking about now is subcutaneous fat, which is fat below the skin, not fat on the organs. So to figure out if you have visceral fat and be able to tactily sense that, you're going to have to get really deep in there, and I don't recommend that at all.
Pinch that same area, you will feel that little droplet that felt like that big now is like that big. You actually feel these seeds grow. And literally, as I'm saying this, I'm watching my crew actually pinch their stomachs. It's kind of funny because it's interesting. If you do that, you can feel it.
I'll be honest,
and
I pinched my stomach. I don't know. Did you pinch your stomach? Leave a comment if you did. He got me on that one.
I'll tell you if a fat cell is absorbing nutrients throughout the course of the day or not. If you can't feel those seeds and you just feel like you're holding some water.
Okay, so just as he was talking about earlier about, a pound of fat is 3,500 calories. And that's going to be spread not just in your subcutaneous fat, but, all over the place. Throughout the day, if you can feel your fat cells growing, I just don't think you can consume enough calories for that. Even if you could feel them in the first place, I just don't see how that's physically possible.
Then it's more than likely just water. So a lot of times, like you'll feel kind of a mushiness and you won't really feel the hard seeds. So now that's a little bit of a digression. Of course, there's also the old hollow sound effect. If you pat your stomach and it sounds dense, well, then more than likely what you see is fat, right? Or fat possibly underneath the muscle. But if you hear more of a hollow sound, it's a very good indicator that you have bloat. Now, I encourage you to pat your stomach throughout different areas. So here, 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 and see where you hear.
Yeah, some doctors will palpate this way to see if there's gas that's being trapped somewhere. So there's something to this, but don't obsess about this kind of stuff. Unless you're using it as an actual diagnostic and you're a physician and you know what you're looking for and what you're hoping to solve, don't just go patting yourself on the stomach. Just, change your diet up, exercise more, strengthen that core so that you don't have the issue. You can keep all that stuff. You can keep that gastric pressure in because, you got a nice strong core and you don't let your man gut spilling all over the place,
Hear the hollowness and see if it lines up with where you're bloated. Okay, if you're bloated down in the right lower quadrant and you pat up here, you're probably going to still feel and hear density versus patting here. So you just have to pat around your entire stomach. Now, again, you don't want to become obsessed with this. It's unhealthy to constantly be patting your stomach, determining if you're.
Yeah, I agree. Don't obsess about this at all. He's right. Just unless you're using it as a specific diagnostic for treatment, don't go around patting yourself on the stomach just to see if you're bloated right now.
bloated or fat, but the reality is you can start understanding. Now, the other thing,
And the other thing is like bloat comes and goes, when the gastric pressure increases, decreases, fat is not going to come and go nearly to that rate. So yeah, you're going to see, you're just going to visually be able to tell the difference a lot better than being able to pat. Again, that's for diagnostic purposes, not to tell if you're bloated or fat.
you can look at is where the bloat occurs. Okay, usually, if you have bloat because it's a disagreement with something that you ate, you're going to have bloat up here. Okay, you're going to feel it up top. If you're having bloating from some kind of FODMAP issue, or you're having bloating from some kind of digestion issue when it comes down to just the hydrogen and methane abundance, you're going to feel it down lower. Okay, you don't usually store fat up here. Okay, even people that are moderately overweight or have a good amount of fat on them, you see they hold their fat down lower, not up here. So if you get bloated up here, you're...
Yeah, it just depends on if you're apple-shaped or pear-shaped. If you have a pear-shaped body and you're overweight, it's very unhealthy because of the visceral fat that's being stored. But yeah, you can actually accumulate gas in different places, whether it's in the upper gut and the lower gut, the stomach or the small intestines, the large intestines, colon. Yeah, it's a temporary thing. Like the gas passes.
You're almost definitely not gaining fat. You don't even store visceral fat too badly up here. It's usually in the lower part of your abdomen still.
Yeah, he's right about that too. You store a lot more visceral fat near the liver and the pancreas, a little bit of organ fat around the stomach, intestines, but yeah, a lot of it's going to be the liver and the pancreas.
The visceral fat is the fat that we don't see, right? It's the hidden fat that's surrounding our organs. So it's good to understand a little bit more. So let's talk about some solutions though, okay? So I'm going to...
The nurse is like trying to feel his fat cell seeds or whatever. And the guy's like, "Can you feel them, doc? Can you feel the seeds?"
give you a few solutions to stop the bloating, or at least reduce it, but I'm also going to give you a few solutions that are going to make it so that those little fat cells don't grow big at the end of the day. Because if you let them grow big at the end of the day, they have a higher chance of converting into something that's going to stay there. We want our fat cells to be nice and small, okay? Because remember, we don't multiply fat cells a whole lot, we just grow existing ones. Okay, so first off...
Yeah, you can multiply fat cells. They can only reach a certain diameter, and then you have to start making more of them. So how this happens is that once you store a certain caloric surplus that goes beyond what your fat cells can absorb, there is some pathway signaling to multiply those fat cells, and once you've done that, they're there forever. Like you don't reduce them. You can't like burn the cells, only the fat inside of the cells. So if you can, it's best just not to really get super overweight in the first place, because even when you lose weight, you're going to end up with additional fat cells that you don't need, and loose skin and all this other kind of stuff. So it's much easier to stay in shape than it is to get into shape. So if you're in shape now, awesome. Don't ever get out of shape.
Lower the FODMAP foods, okay? That's just foods that are going to...
Before he was just saying that the FODMAP thing has been debunked, and now his solution is to lower your FODMAPs. So that's a little inconsistent. However, I agree with him. If you're getting a lot of bloat, you should definitely lower your FODMAPs. There's more than just being bloated when it comes to gastric pressure. There's a lot of other issues that can arise that are not good. Having that pressure in the gut is not a good thing. It can lead to acid reflux. It can lead to different forms of cancers. It can lead to higher blood pressure. You just don't want to have too much pressure in the gut.
Ferment a whole lot. You just have to use them in moderation, okay? You have to introduce them slowly, and you can look up online FODMAP foods, okay? Eliminate them and then introduce them one by one.
So I did this review on the elimination diet that talked about basically what he's saying about how to look at FODMAPs and add them slowly to see what you're sensitive to. And my goal was a little bit different with the diet. My goal is not to figure out which foods you're sensitive to and avoid them forever. It's to fix the gut so that you can eat whatever you want to without ending up with a bunch of extra bloat. And that requires balancing the microbiome. And so, yeah, check out that video on the elimination diet if you're interested. I went into a lot of detail, and I even had a vegan way for how to do the elimination diet if you're a vegan.
And see which ones you have issues with. The issue is you don't want to just completely eradicate them out of your diet, because then you're always going to have an issue with them. But you should go back to square one and reintroduce them one by one. Like for me, for example, I found I love garlic, but I found that I just don't bother having garlic until the end of the day, because I will get super bloated if I have garlic throughout the rest of the course of the day. But if I wait until the end of the day, sure, I'll get bloated, but I'm going to bed, who cares? Okay.
Yeah, so that's right. He's talking more about immunosensitivity rather than necessarily all-encompassing bloat here. But yeah, like adding them in to be able to figure out what's going on is an important step. But then you need to take the next step, which is being able to handle those better. Avoiding them forever, like he said, is not a good solution, because the longer you abstain from that particular food, the more sensitive you're going to get to that food in a number of cases. And that, again, that's sort of the immunosensitivity, not necessarily the bacterial overgrowth stuff, because if you stop feeding bacteria, their numbers are going to shrink. But there's issues beyond that when it comes to the entirety of the microflora.
That's my one food that I found definitely bloats me big time. The next one is, if you're going to have your veggies, just cook them as best you can. All right. Honestly, a lot of times you've got things like broccoli and cauliflower that have raffinose in them. Raffinose is a sugar that's notorious for not breaking down.
Yeah, so raffinose is a disaccharide, which is the D in FODMAP, and some people with upper gut issues could possibly have an issue with that. There's not a whole lot of disaccharides in cruciferous vegetables, like maybe a few grams per cup. So it's not a major thing. And they also there's an enzyme called amylase that breaks it down into monosaccharides, and actually the cruciferous vegetables themselves have those enzymes within their fibers, because that's how they break it down into glucose and then get energy. When you cook a vegetable or anything with amylase will break down somewhere between 100 or it will activate somewhere between 130 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. So as you cook it up, it activates the amylase, which will then convert it into glucose. And then I think it's a good thing for cruciferous vegetables, because number one, it makes them a lot sweeter. I think it makes it taste better. Two, it breaks down those disaccharides if you're having issues with that. And three, it unlocks a lot of the nutrients, like the sulforaphanes that are inside of those that have some anti-cancer fighting properties. Eat them with mustard or mustard, ground up mustard seed. It'll increase the efficacy of the cancer fighting properties for cruciferous vegetables. That's a good tip. But yeah, at the very least, blanch your veggies. Just take just get a boiling pot of water and just drop them in and boil them for 1 minute to 4 minutes or something. Just, and again, they're going to come out with a lot more color, still going to have that al dente bite to it. And I think it's going to taste a lot better and be a lot better for you. But yeah, definitely cook your broccolis, your cauliflowers, your kales, your Brussels sprouts, all that good stuff.
Okay, that disaccharide does not break down into a monosaccharide. So you just want to make sure that you cook them up as much as you can. It gets rid of some of that raffinose.
No. You want the disaccharide to break down into a monosaccharide. You don't want it to stay a disaccharide. That's opposite.
Out of it. Okay, the other thing that you want to be doing is you want to be careful with some of the cruciferous vegetables. Okay, cruciferous vegetables should always be cooked. Don't be having raw broccoli. Don't be having raw cauliflower. It's going to cause a problem for you. The other thing that you want to make.
Yeah, I agree with that. You should cook them. The other issue with cruciferous vegetables, actually the biggest issue that people have with cruciferous vegetables, are the sulforaphanes. The sulfur And again, he was talking about his issue with garlic too. So it seems like he has an issue with sulfur in his gut that he needs to work on. And sort of how this happens is we have early life, and you have bacteria, and once they get to a certain number and they start flourishing, and then they start to behave very differently, and then they can start emitting hydrogen sulfide gas, and you have things like red tides, and you have things that just can wipe out mass populations of animal species. And our ancestors developed olfactory, or the sense of smell, to be able to detect sulfur very well so that they could get away if that was happening. And the organisms that didn't have that ability are not our ancestors because they died. So that was sort of how we evolved our sense of smell. But we're very sensitive to the hydrogen sulfide, and if you got bacteria in your gut or other microorganisms in your gut that are producing it, you need to kill them off and rebalance the gut, or else you're always going to have issues with a lot of tasty foods. Even some people have issues with seafood as well.
Make sure you're doing is balancing your minerals, okay? Because here's the thing. Bloating doesn't just manifest through intestinal bloating and stomach bloating. Like, we can bloat with water retention too. So sometimes at the end of the day, it's like you wake up in the morning, you feel nice and lean, and then towards the end of the day, it's like you're holding all this water. That's usually just a mineral imbalance, plain and simple.
Okay, so yeah, last week I did a video on hydration, and definitely check that out. I go into a lot of detail on how water retention occurs, and it's not just sodium, it's sodium plus sort of mineral corticoid like aldosterone or cortisone or something. So it has to do with your hormones and what you're eating, not just one, not just the other. But your hormones will adapt to your minerals, the minerals that you're consuming, over a period of a few days. If your diet's rapidly changing, like if you eat way too much salt for dinner the night before, yeah, the next morning you could definitely be feeling bloated. I could definitely see how that would be happening. But hormones play an enormous part into water retention.
It's like you're probably getting too much sodium and not enough magnesium, not enough potassium. If you know me, you know I'm a huge proponent of getting a lot of salt in. So keep your salt in, but counterbalance it with potassium, magnesium. So get that through your foods, but I mean, there's no shame in taking a magnesium or potassium supplement to help counterbalance it. It will keep you looking leaner throughout the course of the day and help that water retention. So remember, if you pinch your abdomen and you don't feel those seeds, it's probably water retention. If you feel those seeds, it's fat that's for some reason in an absorptive phase, high level.
Also, with your water retention, you're not going to just absorb water subcutaneously also underneath the skin. It's going to be everywhere. The water retention that should be of interest to you for lower abdominal distension is fluid collection in the GI. And how this usually occurs, if you're just looking bloated in your lower abdomen, you're not just bloated all over, puffy face and, all that kind of stuff with overall bloat. You probably consume something that's an irritant, and your intestines are sending in water through the tight junctions to flush it out, and that is going to cause fluid to collect, and it might cause some additional distension.
Levels of insulin, whatever. The other thing is, don't fast too much. You see, if you fast too often, then you lose your tolerance to certain foods. So I always recommend people fast every other day or so. But if you fast every day, then you're limiting your exposure to certain foods, which is going to make it harder to digest them.
So your microbiome can shift fairly rapidly within 24 to 72 hours. It just depends on how long you're fasting. If you're doing the 1 meal a day diet, it's going to affect your microbiome a little more than if you do the warrior diet, which has a 4-hour feeding window, and then intermittent fasting, that window can change depending on whose blog you're reading. But it's usually like these daily fasts, or these eating for, having a feeding window every day, eating every day, it's not going to be enough to have a big change on the microbiome or on food sensitivity. What you want to do is get a variety of foods every day and eat a variety of different foods every single day, so that you're varying your diet, so that one organism doesn't become opportunistic. And how this occurs is that you have some particular food that feeds one species of bacteria better than another, and they start to overpopulate, and then they kind of dominate and take over, and their behavior changes when their number gets above a certain threshold, and that's not good. So if you're mixing things up, then you're probably going to have a more balanced microflora.
So then when you do have them, you're going to get a lot more bloated. I see this happen to people that fast quite a bit too much, and it can be really uncomfortable. And the next one is, if you are going to have starches, expose yourself to them slowly. So if you've been fasting, don't just load up on a bunch of carbs. If you've been keto and you're going to have some starches, try to introduce a little bit first before you go overboard on that cheat meal, because honestly, it's going to make your life a lot better. You're not going to get as bloated. You get those enzymes a chance to ramp up. You get the bacteria that is involved in carbohydrate digestion a chance to ramp up. It just makes your life a lot better. And lastly, when it comes down
when I was doing keto and I did my carb refeeds, I didn't really notice too much water retention in the gut, but it's possible because carbohydrates are hydrophilic, which means that they attract water. So if you eat a bunch of carbohydrates, it could draw more water into the intestines. If you haven't had carbohydrates in a while, it could do that more. If you eat a whole bolus or a large quantity of carbohydrates at once, like it could definitely cause some bloat, but not near as much bloat as what gas will do from microorganisms.
Down to fat accumulation, don't mix fats and carbs, okay? Fats and carbs are like the worst combination, simply because insulin spikes when you have the carbohydrate, and then the fat that is there goes along for the ride. Insulin tells the cell to absorb. If you spike your insulin with carbohydrates, the cell opens up. But if you also ate fats, then the fats are going to go into storage too. So one surefire way to gain fat is to combine fats and carbs.
Okay, so this is kind of like the meal timing theory or the macronutrient timing theory, where you're not supposed to eat fats and carbs at the same time because it increases your weight gain. And the way he describes it is that carbohydrates spike your insulin, and then the insulin allows you to absorb more fat. If you have a lot of fat that you've already consumed, you're going to be absorbing that fat. I think that with carbohydrate, it spikes insulin pretty quickly, and because of the regulation of blood sugar, the regulation of fatty acids and triglycerides are a lot slower regulated than with the blood sugar. So for instance, if you eat a bunch of fat, it gets sent to the liver, and the liver is going to take the fat and break it down, recomposite it into triglycerides, and then there's these protein packets, and the liver is going to start filling the protein packets up with the triglycerides and then send it out into the bloodstream for transport. And when the packets are filled up a lot, we call them high density lipid packets, or HDL, and when they feed some part of your body and then they are sent back to the liver to be filled up again, it's called LDL because they're low density. They have less triglycerides inside of them, so they're going back to the liver to get filled up again. And this is what occurs. Now, your insulin's going to spike when it's going to spike, and then it's going to the fat cells are going to absorb the surplus fat. Either way, the timing on it doesn't really matter. Some evidence shows that eating fat and carbohydrates at the same time, the fat will slow the digestion of the carbohydrate, spiking insulin less. But again, it has no predictive change of weight gain. So I disagree with him on the food combination diet theory that he's talking about right now.
If you feel your stomach and you feel like you've gained fat at the end of the day and you've been combining fats and carbs, well, unfortunately, it could be fat. So that's just one way to tell. Anyway, if you have ideas for further expansion on this topic, let me know down in the comment section below. But until then, make sure you're keeping it locked in here on my channel. And as always, make sure that you're staying healthy, staying keto, and staying fasting. See you soon.
Okay, so yeah, I liked the video. I liked his channel. I thought he did a really good job with his presentation. I really like that he's drawing attention to gut health, which I think has been, we come to the same conclusions in a lot of cases. It's just the mechanisms, I think, is where we disagree on. But if you're having bloating issues and you reduce your FODMAPs and you know how to reintroduce them slowly, I think that's excellent advice. And I'm just happy that more people, with, this video got, 750,000 views just about, and he's got 2.51 million subscribers. So that's getting this information out to a lot of people, and that makes me really happy because, John and I have devoted a ton of time and research on trying to educate people about gut health, and it's great that this is getting picked up by more than the mainstream YouTubers and stuff, getting that information out there. So, yeah, really happy that he made this video, and I hope it helps a lot of people. So, hey, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. Rain or shine, even though it's freezing cold out here in Texas, I'm still putting out content. So if you want to get updates, make sure to hit that subscribe button and then the notification bell so that you can be alerted to whenever John or I produces a new video. We're going to start doing some videos together here pretty shortly. We're getting our software worked out with that, and we're going to be rebooting that again. So look forward to some more great content with Fix Your Gut. And until then, have a great week.